In 1986, the SPR admitted this to be the case and retracted the findings of the report. However, Johnson has commented Theosophists have overinterpreted this as complete vindication, when in fact many questions raised by Hodgson still remain unanswered. In 1886, by which time she was using a wheelchair, Blavatsky moved to Ostend in Belgium, where she was visited by Theosophists from across Europe. Among them was the Dr. William Ashton Ellis, who treated her during a near-fatal illness in March of 1887, and Blavatsky credited him with saving her life. Supplementing her pension, she established a small ink-producing business. She received messages from members of the Society's London Lodge who were dissatisfied with Sinnott's running of it. They believed that he was focusing on attaining upper-class support rather than encouraging the promotion of theosophy throughout society, a criticism Blavatsky agreed with. She arrived in London in May of 1887, where she initially stayed in the Upper Norwood home of theosophist Mabel Collins. She moved into the Holland Park home of fellow theosophists, Bertram Cately and his nephew Archibald Cately, in September. In London, she established the Blavatsky Lodge as a rival to that run by Sinnott, draining much of its membership. Lodge meetings were held at the Cately's house on Thursday nights, with Blavatsky also greeting many visitors there, among them the occultist and poet W.B. Yeats. In November of 1889, she was visited by the Indian lawyer Mohandas Gandhi, who was studying the Bhagavad Gita with the Knightleys. He became an associate member of Blavatsky's lodge in March of 1891 and would emphasize the close connection between theosophy and Hinduism throughout his life. In 1888, Blavatsky established the esoteric section of the Theosophical Society, a group under her complete control for which admittance was restricted to those who had passed certain tests. She identified it as a place for true theosophists who would focus on the system's philosophy rather than experiment with producing paranormal phenomena. Blavatsky founded a magazine while in London that she controversially titled Lucifer. In this theosophical publication, she sought to completely ignore claims regarding paranormal phenomena and focus instead on a discussion of philosophical ideas. Blavatsky also finished writing The Secret Doctrine, which was then edited by the Cateleys. As a commercial publisher willing to publish the approximately 1,500-page work could not be found, Blavatsky established the Theosophical Publishing Company, who brought out the work in 2 volumes. The first published in October of 1888 and the second in January of 1889. Blavatsky claimed that the book constituted her commentary on the Book of Zion, a religious text written in Senzor, which she had been taught while studying in Tibet. Buddhologist David Rigel claimed that he identified books of QT, including Blavatsky's Book of Zion as a first volume, as the Tantra section of the Tibetan Buddhist canon. However, most Buddhist scholars to have examined The Secret Doctrine have concluded that there was no such text as the Book of Zion, and that instead it was the fictional creation of Blavatsky's. In the book, Blavatsky outlined her own cosmogonical ideas about how the universe, the planets, and the human species came to exist. She also discussed her views about the human being and their soul, thus dealing with issues surrounding an afterlife. The 2-volume book was reviewed for the Pall Mall Gazette by the social reformer Annie Besant, who was impressed by it. She subsequently met with Blavatsky and joined the Theosophists. In August 1890, Blavatsky moved into Besant's large house at 19 Avenue Road in St. John's Wood. She appointed Besant to be the new head of the Blavatsky Lodge, and in July of 1890 inaugurated the new European headquarters of the Theosophical Society in Besant's house. When there, she authored a book containing questions and corresponding answers, which was titled The Key to Theosophy. This was followed by The Voice of the Silence, a short devotional text which she claimed was based on a censor text known as the Book of the Golden Precepts. As with the secret doctrine, most scholars of Buddhism have doubted that this latter text was an authentic Tibetan Buddhist document. She continued to face accusations of fraud. United States newspaper The Sun published a July of an 1890s article based on information provided by Elliot Cusson, ex-member of the Society, and Blavatsky sued the newspaper for libel, of which they publicly retracted their accusations in September of 1892. That winter, Britain had been afflicted by an influenza epidemic, the global of 1889 to 1890 flu pandemic, with Blavatsky contracting the virus. This led to her death on the afternoon of the 8th of May in 1891 in Besant's house. The date would come to be commemorated by Theosophists ever since as White Lotus Day. Her body was cremated at Woking Crematorium on 11th of May. In life, Blavatsky talked incessantly in a guttural voice, sometimes wittily and sometimes crudely. She was indifferent to sex, yet frank and open about it, fonder of animals than of people, welcoming, unpretentious, scandalous, capricious, and rather noisy. She was also humorous, vulgar, impulsive, and warm-hearted, and didn't give a hoot for anyone or anything. The biographer Peter Washington described Blavatsky as a short, stout, forceful woman with strong arms, several chins, unruly hair, a determined mouth, and large, liquid, slightly bulging eyes. She had distinctive azure-colored eyes and was overweight throughout her life. According to the biographer Marion Mead, Blavatsky's general appearance was outrageously untidy. In her later life, she was known for wearing loose robes, and she wore many rings on her fingers. She was a heavy cigarette smoker throughout her life and was known for smoking hashish at times. She lived simply, and her followers believed that she refused to accept monetary payment in return for disseminating her teachings. Blavatsky preferred to be known by the initialism HPB, a sobriquet applied to her by many of her friends, which was first developed by Alcott. She avoided social functions and was scornful of social obligations. She spoke Russian, Georgian, English, French, Italian, Arabic, and Sanskrit. Mead referred to her as an eccentric who abided by no rules except her own, someone who had utter disregard for the Victorian code of morality. Mead believed that Blavatsky perceived herself as a messianic figure whose purpose was to save the world by promoting theosophy. Lockman stated that Blavatsky exhibited what he referred to as Russian traits: an intense devotion to spiritual truth, combined with a profound contradictory character. Washington expressed the view that noted that she was self-absorbed and egotistical, and she was also a persuasive storyteller with the power to fascinate others. For Mead, Blavatsky had a vivid imagination and a propensity for lying. Godwin noted that Blavatsky had a fearsome temper. The religious studies scholar Bruce F. Campbell noted that she had been a strong-willed, independent child, and that the harsh environment of her childhood might have resulted in her difficulty in controlling her temper and her tendency to swear. In his opinion, she represented an archetypal charismatic leader. Anthropologist Leo Kledge claimed that Blavatsky's indefatigability and energy were surprising. Indologist Alexander Sienkiewicz stated that her charisma exerted influence on Charles Massey and Stanton Moses. Godwin suggested that Blavatsky's life work was not only spiritual, but socially idealistic and fiercely political. He suggested that her emotional fuel was partly a hatred of oppression, which Godwin claimed was either through the intellectual domination of Christianity or British colonial rule in India. Conversely, Mead thought Blavatsky to be basically a non-political person. Her social and political beliefs, like much else in her life, are not always consistent, though reflect what she felt she could reveal of a larger vision. That was, more than anything else, the vision of the succession of root races. These races were a flexible category, cultural as well as physiological, with races often combining in the course of history. Gary Lachman wrote, "Moreover, inspired by recent acrimonious debates over evolution, they are also dynamic, emergent forces. Although few historians have noted it, in Isis Unveiled in 1877, Blavatsky presented the first major intellectual, not religious criticism of evolution." Lachman in 2012 stated that Blavatsky held that Darwinism explained human physical evolution, while spirituality followed another developmental pattern. The scholar of religion Olav Hammer noted that on rare occasions, Blavatsky's writings are overtly racist, adding that her anti-Semitism derives from the unfortunate position of Judaism as the origin of Christianity and refers to the intense dislike she felt for Christianity. According to Mead, Blavatsky assembled her theories and doctrines, gradually, in a piecemeal fashion. Blavatsky claimed that these theosophical doctrines were not her own invention, but had been received from a brotherhood of secretive spiritual adepts whom she referred to as the Masters or Mahatmas. Blavatsky was the leading theoretician of the Theosophical Society, responsible for establishing its doctrinal basis. The ideas expounded in her published texts provide the basis from which the society and wider theosophical movement emerged. Blavatsky's theosophical ideas were a form of occultism. She subscribed to the anti-Christian current of thought within Western esotericism, which emphasized the idea of an ancient and universal occult science that should be revived. Blavatsky stated that the theosophical teachings were passed on to her by adepts who lived in various parts of the world. Fundamentally, the underlying concept behind Blavatsky's theosophy was that there was an ancient wisdom religion which had once been found across the world and which was known to various ancient figures, such as the Greek philosopher Plato and the ancient Hindu sages. Blavatsky connected this ancient wisdom religion to Hermetic philosophy, a worldview in which everything in the universe is identified as an emanation from the Godhead. Blavatsky believed that all of the world's religions developed from this original global faith. Blavatsky understood her theosophy to be the heir to the Neoplatonist philosophers of late antiquity, who had also embraced Hermetic philosophy. She claimed that due to Christianization in Europe, that this magical tradition was lost there. However, it persisted in modified form in India and Africa, promoting a self-consciously magical disenchantment narrative. In turn, Blavatsky believed that the theosophical movement's revival of the ancient wisdom religion would lead to its spreading across the world, eclipsing the established world religions. Thus, in bringing these theosophical ideas to humanity, Blavatsky viewed herself as a messianic figure. According to Goodr Clark, the Theosophical Society disseminated an elaborate philosophical edifice involving a cosmogony, the macrocosm of the universe, spiritual hierarchies, and intermediary beings, the latter having correspondences with a hierarchical conception of the microcosm of man. Officially, the society based itself upon the following three objectives: to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. To encourage the study of comparative religion, philosophy, and science. 3. To investigate the unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in man. Washington believed that the purpose of these 3 precepts was to lead to the discovery of the powers latent in man through the occult study of science, philosophy, and religion, which shall be the preferred route to the social harmony and equality, which will prefigure and perhaps become the divine harmony. While living in New York City, Blavatsky had referred to herself as a Buddhist, although she only officially embraced Buddhism while in Ceylon. Nevertheless, Logman stated that her Buddhism was highly eccentric and had little to do with the Buddhism of scholars like Max Muller or that of your average Buddhist. Blavatsky argued that the Buddha had sought to return to the teachings of the Vedas, and that Buddhism therefore represented a more accurate survival of ancient Brahmanism than modern Hinduism. Although critical of Catholicism and Protestantism and opposing their growth in Asia, throughout her life she remained highly sympathetic to the Russian Orthodox Church, commenting that, "With the faith of the Russian Church, I will not even compare Buddhism." 2 things in all the chaos of her: Blavatsky's cosmos stood firm in every mood that her teachers existed and that she had not cheated. G.R. Mead proclaimed. Blavatsky's writings garnered the materials of Neoplatonism, Renaissance magic, Kabbalah, and Freemasonry, together with ancient Egyptian and Greco-Roman mythology and religion, joined by Eastern doctrines taken from Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta to present the idea of an ancient wisdom handed down from prehistoric times. Blavatsky expounded what has been described as a monotheistic, immanentist, and mystical cosmology. Blavatsky was a pantheist and emphasized the idea of an impersonal divinity, referring to the Theosophical God as a universal divine principle, the root of all, from which all proceeds and within which all shall be absorbed at the end of the great cycle of being. She was dismissive of the Christian idea of God in the Western world, describing it as a bundle of contradictions and a logical impossibility. She stated that the universe emanated from this divine principle, with each particle of matter being infused with a spark of the divine. Lower orders emanated from higher ones, before becoming increasingly dense and being absorbed back into the divine principle. This cosmology exhibited commonalities with the scientific discoveries of geology and biological evolution, both of which had been revealed by scientific inquiry during the 19th century. In The Secret Doctrine, Blavatsky articulated the belief that in the beginning of time there was absolute nothingness. This primordial essence then separated itself into 7 rays, which were also intelligent beings known as the Dayan Chohans. These 7 rays then created the universe using an energy called Fohat. The Earth was created and underwent 7 rounds, in each of which different living beings were created. Blavatsky advocated the idea of root races, each of which was divided into 7 subraces. In Blavatsky's cosmogony, the first root race were created from pure spirit and lived on a continent known as the imperishable sacred land. The second root race, known as the Hyperboreans, were also formed from pure spirit and lived on a land near to the North Pole, which then had a mild climate. The third lived on the continent of Lemuria, which Blavatsky alleged survives today as Australia and Rapa Nui. She alleged that during the 4th round of the Earth, higher beings descended to the planet, with the beginnings of human physical bodies developing and the sexes separating. At this point, the 4th root race appeared, living on the continent of Atlantis. They had physical bodies, but also psychic powers and advanced technology. She claimed that some Atlanteans were giants and built such ancient monuments as Stonehenge in southern England, and that they also mated with she-animals, resulting in the creation of gorillas and chimpanzees. The Atlanteans were decadent and abused their power and knowledge, so Atlantis sunk into the sea, although various Atlanteans escaped and created new societies in Egypt and the Americas. The fifth root race to emerge was the Aryans, and was found across the world at the time she was writing. She believed that the fifth race would come to be replaced by the sixth, which would be heralded by the arrival of Maitreya, a figure from Mahayana Buddhist mythology. She further believed that humanity would eventually develop into the final, seventh root race. Lachmann suggested that by reading Blavatsky's cosmogonical claims as a literal account of history, we may be doing it a disservice. He instead suggested that it could be read as Blavatsky's attempt to formulate a new myth for the modern age, or as a huge fantastic science fiction story. Blavatsky taught that humans are composed of three separate parts: a divine spark, an astral fluid body, and the physical body. Later, Blavatsky proclaimed the septenary of man and universe. According to Blavatsky, man is composed of 7 parts: Atma, Buddhi, Manas, Kama Rupa, Linga Sharira, Prana, and Sthula Sharira. In Isis Unveiled, Blavatsky denied that humans would be reincarnated back on the earth after physical death. However, by the time that she had authored The Secret Doctrine, she had changed her opinion on this issue, likely influenced by her time in India. Here, she stated that the law of reincarnation was governed by karma, with humanity's final purpose being the emancipation of the soul from the cycle of death and rebirth. She believed that knowledge of karma would ensure that human beings lived according to moral principles, arguing that it provided a far greater basis for moral action than that of the Christian doctrine. Blavatsky wrote, in Isis Unveiled, that spiritualism alone offers a possible last refuge of compromise between the revealed religions and materialistic philosophies. While she acknowledged that fanatic believers remained blind to its imperfections, she wrote that such a fact was no excuse to doubt its reality, and asserted that spiritualist fanaticism was itself a proof of the genuineness and possibility of their phenomena. Goodert Clark noted that Blavatsky's cosmology contained all 4 of the prime characteristics of Western esotericism that had been identified by the scholar Antoine Faber. A. Correspondences between all parts of the universe, the macrocosm and microcosm. B. Living nature as a complex, plural, hierarchical and animate whole. C. Imagination and mediations in the form of intermediary spirits, symbols and mandalas. And D. The experience of transmutation of the soul through purification and ascent. Blavatsky was one of the most significant, controversial, and prolific of modern esotericists. It is more than evident that, whatever one thinks of the more flamboyant aspects of this remarkable and many-sided woman, she possessed a keen intellect and a wide-ranging vision of what occultism could be in the modern world. Various authors, including William Emmett Coleman and others, have questioned the authenticity of her writings by citing evidence that they are heavily plagiarized from older esoteric sources, pronouncing her claim of the existence of masters of wisdom to be utterly false, and accusing her of being a charlatan, false medium, and falsifier of letters. Eastern literature scholar Arthur Lilly published a list of extracts from mystic works next to extracts from Blavatsky's writings purporting to show her extensive plagiarism in his book Madame Blavatsky and Her Theosophy. Lilly also analyzed the Mahatma letters and asserted, based on peculiarities of expression and spelling, that they had been written by Blavatsky. The traditionalist school writer René Guénon wrote a detailed critique of theosophy in which he claimed that Blavatsky had acquired all her knowledge naturally from other books rather than supernatural so-called masters. Carl Jung virulently criticized her work, and Ajahananda Bharati dismissed it as a melee of horrendous hogwash and of fertile inventions of inane esoterica. Mircea Eliade suggested that her theory of spiritual evolution contradicts the entire spirit of the Eastern tradition, which is precisely an anti-evolutionist conception of the spiritual life. After her death, Blavatsky continued to be accused of having fraudulently produced paranormal phenomena by skeptics such as John Neville Maskelyne, Robert Todd Carroll, and James Randi. Peter Washington notes that Blavatsky's beliefs clashed with both Christianity and science, Darwinism in particular. Furthermore, Washington claims that Blavatsky's supporters argued against any criticisms of her as slander by Christians and Darwinians conceiving her as a martyr. According to religious studies scholar Mark Bever, Blavatsky adapted the occult tradition to meet the challenge of Victorian science and morality. Historian Ronald Hutton described Blavatsky as one of the century's truly international figures whose ideas gained considerable popularity. Various biographers have noted that by the late 20th and early 21st centuries, Blavatsky was little known among the general public. In 2006, scholar James A. Santucci nevertheless noted that she was as visible today as any modern trend-setting guru, and she will most likely remain the most memorable and innovative esotericist of the 19th century. Some scholars have suggested that Blavatsky sometimes spoke and/or wrote while in altered states of consciousness. G.R.S. Mead wrote about Blavatsky, "I know no one who detested, more than she did, any attempt to hero worship herself. She positively physically shuddered at any expression of reverence to herself as a spiritual teacher. I have heard her cry out in genuine alarm at an attempt to kneel to her maid by an enthusiastic admirer." Leo Kledgen wrote about Blavatsky, "Indefatigability and energy of this woman were surprising. She had a revolutionary's merits." Mabel Collins, an associate and publisher of Lucifer between 1887 and 1889, believed Blavatsky's influence to be derived largely from a talent for manipulation. After leaving the Theosophical movement, Collins said that she taught me one great lesson. I learned from her how foolish, how gullible, how easily flattered human beings are, taken en masse. Her contempt for her kind was on the same gigantic scale as everything else about her, except her marvelously delicate taper fingers. In all else, she was a big woman. She had a greater power over the weak and credulous, a greater capacity for making black appear white, a larger waist, a more voracious appetite, a more confirmed passion for tobacco, a more ceaseless and insatiable hatred for those whom she thought to be her enemies, a greater disrespect for less convenances, a worse temper, a greater command of bad language, and a greater contempt for the intelligence of her fellow beings than I had ever supposed possible to be contained in one person. These, I suppose, must be reckoned as her vices, though whether a creature so indifferent to all ordinary standards of right and wrong can be held to have virtues or vices, I know not. Blavatsky presented her book, The Voice of the Silence, to Leo Tolstoy. In his works, Tolstoy used the dicta from Theosophischer Wegweiser, a theosophical journal. On the 12th of February, 1903, in his diary entry, Tolstoy wrote, "I am reading a beautiful theosophical journal and find many commonalities with my understanding." According to Kalnitsky, the theosophical movement of the 19th century was created and defined in the main through the astuteness and conceptual ideas provided by H.P. Blavatsky. He stated that without her charismatic leadership and uncompromising promotion of the theosophical agenda, it appears unlikely that the movement could have attained its unique form. By the time of her death in 1891, she was the acknowledged head of a community numbering nearly 100,000 with journalistic organs in London, Paris, New York, and Madras. Her writings have been translated and published in a wide range of European and Asian languages. Blavatsky's theosophy redirected the interest in spiritualism toward a more coherent doctrine that included cosmology with theory of evolution in an understanding of humanity's spiritual development. Further, it took the traditional sources of Western esotericism and globalized them by restating many of their ideas in terminology adopted from Asian religions. Blavatsky's theosophy was able to appeal to women by de-emphasizing the importance of gender and allowing them to take on spiritual leadership equal to that of men, thus allowing them a greater role than that permitted in traditional Christianity. Since its inception, and through doctrinal assimilation or divergence, theosophy has also given rise to or influenced the development of other mystical, philosophical, and religious movements. During the 1920s, the Theosophical Society had around 7,000 members in the United States. There also was a substantial following in Asia. According to a theosophical source, the Indian section in 2008 was said to have around 13,000 members, while in the United States, the 2008 membership was reported at around 3,900. Blavatsky's theosophy has been described as representing a major factor in the modern revival of Western esotericism. Godwin deemed there to be no more important figure in modern times within the Western esoteric tradition than Blavatsky. For Johnson, Blavatsky was a central figure in the 19th century occult revival. Lockman claimed that practically all modern occultism and esotericism can trace its origins back to her influence. Blavatsky's published theosophical ideas, particularly those regarding root races, have been cited as an influence on Ariosophy, the esoteric movement established in late 19th and early 20th century Germany and Austria by Guido von List and Georg Lanz von Liebenfels. Hannah Newman stated that via Ariosophy, Blavatsky's theosophical ideas contributed to Nazi ideology. Nevertheless, Lockman has asserted that Blavatsky should not be held accountable to any of the anti-Semitic and racist ideas that the Ariosophists promoted, commenting that were she alive to witness the development of Ariosophy, she probably would have denounced its ideas regarding race. Blavatsky's theosophical ideas regarding root races have also been cited as an influence on anthroposophy. The esoteric movement developed by Rudolf Steiner in early 20th century Germany, with Steiner's Anthroposophical Society being termed a historical offshoot of the Theosophical Society. Blavatsky's theosophy has been cited as an influence on the New Age movement, an esoteric current that emerged in Western nations during the 1970s. No single organization or movement has contributed so many components to the New Age movement as the Theosophical Society. It has been the major force in the dissemination of occult literature in the West in the 20th century. Other organizations loosely based on theosophical texts and doctrines include the Agni Yoga and a group of religions based on theosophy called the Ascended Master Teachings, the I Am Activity, the Bridge to Freedom, Universal Medicine, and the Summit Lighthouse, which evolved into the Church Universal and Triumphant. American scholar of religion Jason Josephson Storm has argued that Blavatsky and her Theosophical Society influenced late 19th and early 20th century academic linguistics. Josephson Storm notes that Blavatsky's linguistic theories and typologies were widely circulated in Europe. and that influential linguists such as Émile Louis Bernouf and Benjamin Lee Warfither practiced theosophy as promoted by the Theosophical Society or publicly defended its doctrines. Ferdinand de Saussure is also known to have attended seances and wrote a lengthy analysis of the theosophical claims about linguistics and India, La Théosophie Brahmanique Brahmanic Theosophy, while delivering his Cours de Linguistique Générale. Hutton suggested that Blavatsky had a greater impact in Asia than in the Western world. Blavatsky has been cited as having inspired Hindus to respect their own religious roots. The Theosophical Society influenced the growth of Indian national consciousness with prominent figures in the Indian independence movement, among them Mohandas Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, being inspired by theosophy to study their own national heritage. The Theosophical Society had a major influence on Buddhist modernism and Hindu reform movements, while Blavatsky and Alcott took part in Anagarika Dharmapala's revival of Theravada Buddhism in Ceylon. Mead stated that more than any other single individual, Blavatsky was responsible for bringing a knowledge of Eastern religion and philosophy to the West. She believed that Indian religion offered answers to problems then facing Westerners. In particular, she believed that Indian religion contained an evolutionary cosmology, which complemented Darwinian evolutionary theory, and that the Indian doctrine of reincarnation met many of the moral qualms surrounding vicarious atonement and eternal damnation that preoccupied 19th century Westerners. In doing so, Mead believed that Blavatsky paved the way for the emergence of later movements such as the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Transcendental Meditation Movement, Zen Buddhism, and Yoga in the West. Hutton believed that the two greatest achievements of Blavatsky's movement were in popularizing belief in reincarnation and in a singular divine world soul within the West. Blavatsky incorporated both a number of the doctrines of Eastern religions into her occultism and interpreted Eastern religions in the light of her occultism. And in so doing, she extended a view of the mystical East that had already been popularized through Romanticist poetry. Max Muller scathingly criticized Blavatsky's esoteric Buddhism. Whilst he was willing to give her credit for good motives, at least at the beginning of her career, in his view, she ceased to be truthful both to herself and to others with her later hysterical writings and performances. "There is nothing esoteric or secretive in Buddhism," he wrote. "In fact, it's the very opposite. Whatever was esoteric was ipso facto not Buddha's teaching. Whatever was Buddha's teaching was ipso facto not esoteric." Blavatsky, it seemed to Muller, was either deceived by others or carried away by her own imaginations. Blavatsky responded to those academic specialists in Indian religion who accused her of misrepresenting it by claiming that they understood only the exoteric nature of Hinduism and Buddhism and not the inner esoteric secrets of these faiths, which she traced back to the ancient Vedas.